All right, so we'll look at the lat pull. Now, as I said the other day with Robert Drew's The Rip, it's a collection of, how many stories? About a dozen, 14 maybe, I'm not going to count them, stories. And what I've given you is the lat pull as the first story. Then the next two stories occur roughly in the middle, in the sequence that I've given you, but I think there's one between Water Person and Tree Person and Masculine Shoes. And then Life Alignment of the Coffee Grower occurs at the end. The construction of the sequence of stories is actually quite important. So we start with someone that we're meant to look at and feel pity for. Leon Kay is the main character. And we're meant to sort of see him, I guess, as a warning. And then progressively through the text, the middle parts sort of, you go, okay, well that's like a normal person, making mistakes, also having wins, having some admirable qualities, having some that aren't ideal, through to the end where we end up with more characters who are more like what we would want to be like. They might not start out that way, but they end up that way, or have the potential to end up that way. So we look at the text with that, it's a rough sort of arc, yeah, from negative positioning towards the characters, so a warning in their stories, through to positive positioning in the characters, and some sort of aspiration coming out of their stories. Who's read it already? Who had a chance to read through it last night? Just to give you a rough idea. Okay, that's great. So what I would do with this is have a couple of colours of highlighter. Does anyone need some highlighters? Sorry?
Do you have a blue one?
Yeah.
Because I have 3, but I don't have 4.
And what do we look for when we're doing some close reading and we're just sort of working through the text with no particular focus, just doing a generic close reading? What sort of things might you look for? Imagery? Language features or stylistic devices? Yeah? Characterization, good. And we're also going to look for concerns. So what we think the views and values are. So that's your fourth colour here. Okay, so normally we look for imagery, language, characterization, and then sometimes we add in another one depending on the task. So in this case we're adding in views and values. Views and values are essentially those underlying sort of beliefs or ideas that the message that the author is trying to convey, or the ideas they're trying to explore. But views and values have a position. So, you know, we talk about concerns normally. Concerns are just those sort of big ideas. A view or a value is a position on the idea. Yeah? So it's trying to convey something that they believe is valuable or important in regards to human condition, social conventions, philosophical ideas. So we're going to assign a colour to each of those: character, imagery, language, and views and values. Now, I'm going to play. Everyone's got themselves organised with 4 colours now. I've got plenty. You don't need to give them back. They might not last the lesson. So I'm going to just get you to yell out to me if you see something. I'll stop if I see something too. I'm not working with an annotated version. I'm working with a clean copy. But sing out if you see something, sing out if you have a question, but otherwise I'll just read through it and stop as we see things that are important. The first few pages are very, very heavily loaded. Okay? What do we expect? I'll start, I promise, shortly. What do we expect with a short story that we might not expect with a novel or a longer text? What sort of expectations would we have in terms of how quickly we get to the guts of the ideas?
I feel like you'd have them quicker, but there'd be like way more imagery packed into a smaller space.
Yep. So yeah, we're going to look at things being fairly densely loaded. Often we don't get all the backstory in short stories. We take a slice of a person's life and we have to sort of work out or problem solve or guess at their backstory, and that's very much the case here. And we don't necessarily expect a very clear resolution often with short stories. Often we're suggested what might happen next, but we don't necessarily see it. This is a longish short story. It's pushing the boundaries for how long short stories are meant to be, but it's still going to have that fairly dense sort of cavalcade of information. The lap pool. Naked and 47, Leon K backstroked steadily up and down his lap pool, an eddy of drowned insects in his wake. What's interesting about his name?
It's not a last name, it's just a letter.
A letter. Why do you think that might be?
Maybe he doesn't want to reveal that about himself.
Perhaps. It's a question that you should hold on to just for the moment, though. It'll become clear why that's just a letter later. What about the idea of this guy swimming naked? What's the imagery of someone, I mean it's unpleasant, but someone naked, what are they not doing? Wearing clothes. Let's try and move beyond the literal.
Caring about their parents.
Yeah, maybe not caring about anyone watching, maybe they're completely alone. Metaphorically,
No protection.
yep, there's no protection, they're completely exposed. Everything's out there to see. Yeah. Maybe they feel very safe. Then we've got the imagery of the drowned insects. You're swimming in it. Who's got a backyard pool? Is anyone lucky enough to have a backyard pool? Just you? Wow, that was. Yeah, I've got one. Oh, no one else. Everyone at Bethany's house if it's a fire day tomorrow. So. Alright, so has it got lots of insects? Okay. So if you're swimming in a pool, in an outside pool, often there's insects, but you're not necessarily aware of them because, you know, look how big we are and look how tiny insects are. And so there's this idea that in his wake is like the current or the rip, and they get caught up in it and drowned, and he's not even aware of it necessarily. Yeah, he's going about his business swimming, and people are falling, well, not people, but insects are falling by the wayside because of his actions. Of course, he knew his rhythm now. He automatically counted strokes as well as laps. Automatically is an important word there. And if you've read the story, perhaps you might be aware that Leon tries to live his life very much on autopilot because it allows him to ignore all the problems that he's facing. Each of the 40 laps that added up to 1 kilometre took him 15 strokes. On each 15th backwards reach, he trusted that the fingertips of his right hand, rather than the back of his skull, would strike the wall first. What's important about that? I mean, that's very evocative imagery, isn't it? If his trust is misplaced, his skull will smash the brickwork. You know, it's quite a strong image. So he's placing a lot of trust in routine and regularity. Why is it important to be swimming backwards?
It's the unknown, you can't actually see.
Yeah. The backstroke represents this fact that he's driving into the future without being able to see where he's going. And that imagery comes up a couple of times in the text. There's the idea of him driving the country road around the blind bends, not knowing if a milk truck and stuff is going to drive him off the road. And it actually comes up a number of times in the collection. Stroking, breathing. He swam almost in a trance. And that idea of being in a trance is very much what his whole life is like. Swimming in the pool is this regular routine of escape for Leon. And his life, he's trying to escape his life. He's trying to ignore it. He's trying to not live it, because actually living it is very, very hard. We know what has happened to him, that he's had a whole range of, his family's broken down, he's being indicted for fraud and all this sort of stuff. Despite the pool's cool temperature, it was a windy autumn and the connection to the solar panels on the farmhouse roof was broken. He needed to swim in order to relax, to cope. So there's a extension there, isn't there? It's not just to relax, but it's more than relax, it's to cope. So we start with something fairly neutral and it escalates with that interruption to cope. So it's a linguistic feature. To live the current version of his life. What's significant of the significance of adding in current version?
It's not always been this way.
It's not always been this way. And perhaps it suggests that it's not actually his life, it's just the current version of it, so it's not what he hopes. And that perhaps also suggests that he's hoping to get back to that original version of his life. He swam as early dawn rays struck the surface, and again as the shadows of the palms crisscrossed the pool in the late afternoon. Nowadays, he preferred backstroke. So notice that if you take that imagery of the backstroke that we identified before as moving backwards and not seeing where we're going, this is characterising Leon's approach to life at this time. And because almost all of you have read it, we remember that he's been indicted for fraud in his business, white-collar crime, and he's professing that he didn't know what was going on. He's, trying to convince us that he just was unaware. And he's sort of, that to him is a form of protection, and he's sort of doing that in his life too. Swimming naked made him feel momentarily free of his current restraints. So we can connect that back to that first line. So this is about freedom, unencumbrance. But it's also about being very vulnerable. He doesn't perceive that, but it is about that too. It wasn't as if anyone was likely to drop by. Swimming on his back was also therapeutic. There were the clouds to observe through the palm fronds, the swifts, which is a type of bird, scooting and flickering after insects, the kestrels hovering like hang gliders over the orchard. In its constancy, this silent aerial activity was immensely soothing. So what's he soothed by? The constancy. What's constancy?
The unchanged.
Yeah. Again, we've got this predictability, like his lap swimming, always 13 strokes. His 40 laps adding up to a kilometre. I mean, that's always going to be the same because distances don't change in a fixed swimming pool. But the regularity, the predictability is a sense of control. And watching the constancy of this movement in an unconstant system, the sky above, the fact that he finds that relaxing tells us a lot about him. What other bits of imagery would you pick out? There's two birds mentioned there, a swift and a kestrel, both quite high-flying birds. Why is he looking at them and seeing them as some sort of escape or some sort of peace?
Because they're not affected by what's going on below them.
Yeah, they're not affected by what's going on below them. And if you take the imagery of the rip or the currents that affect our lives, birds use them to lift. That's what they, kestrels and swifts don't flap their wings very much. They do to take off. But otherwise they navigate the currents in the air to get lift. And so he's seeing these birds doing something that he can't. Yeah? So there's a sense of freedom and a sense of control in all these images. There was always at least one bird somewhere in the sky. A Google search attested to the state swimming success of his youth. 30 years later, he was a tall, keg-chested man with arms and legs less disproportionately long than they'd seemed back then. A more bowed and slope-shouldered specimen too, he noticed lately, more weighed down by the gravity of anxious time and snowballing events than even a year ago. Just highlight the negative language in there. Weighed down, gravity, anxious time, snowballing events. So we get this contrast of his youth, which is quite nice, and then the negativity of the current time. Contrast against each other, juxtaposed. It's not antithesis because they're not right next to each other. Juxtaposing is putting one thing in close approximation, particularly in that longer selection of images. His 6 months alone and the farm was so quiet his 6th month alone and the farm was so quiet these afternoons, just before the cockatoo clamour of sunset, that from the pool Leon Kay could hear his daughter's downcast ponies tearing grumpily at the grass in the home paddock. Awaiting his trial, sorry, I've got to stop there. He's alone on the farm, but then we've got the mention of the daughter's ponies. So what do we know? What can we deduce?
He has a family.
He has a family that's not with him. Awaiting his trial, which had been adjourned for yet another 4 months while the authorities strengthened their case against him, he swam his 2 lap sessions and paced his overgrown boundaries, scrutinising nature. What are the important words in that sentence?
Paced.
Paced. Why is paced important?
Shows he doesn't really have anything else to do.
Yeah. Has anyone been to the zoo recently? The Melbourne Zoo? Do you remember going to the zoo when you were younger and seeing the big cats? Tigers, they walk up and down along the fence and there's often a rut in the ground where they've been walking. It's because they're not happy. Yeah? If you see animals rocking, I remember going to the China Zoo and seeing pandas and they're rocking, that means they're really distressed. The animals pacing back and forth is also a sign of distress. And he's showing that same animalistic sense. Yeah? He's pacing the boundaries. He's measuring his life, taking stock, and scrutinising himself and what he's got. And he's not happy about it. The rest of the time, or during the region's frequent electrical storms, he restlessly roamed the veranda. Notice the alliteration. Brings attention to what sort of words there. They're both negative words, aren't they? Restlessly and roam. Builds on that pacing idea. By day, with a pot of green tea and a Sudoku puzzle, and by night, with a bottle of his cellar's dwindling supply of Merlot or Pinot Noir. So what's he doing?
Drinking away his problems.
Yeah. So he drinks a bottle to himself every night. Some might not have an issue with that. I don't know, I don't drink, so I don't really know if the bottle's excessive, but I imagine it is per night for one person. Maybe not as a teenager, experimenting with binge consumption and destroying your young livers. But for this guy who's doing that every day, on his own, this is not a positive behaviour. But it's interesting because it's contrast against the image of a pot of green tea, which is seems quite healthy, and a Sudoku puzzle, which is keeping his mind active. And those two sort of things, one's drowning and one's sort of hiding and blocking the world from him, and the other one is sort of almost self-development. So it's interesting. I don't know why that contrast is there, because largely Leon Kay is not someone who we see as being an effective human being. By now, all the official delays, court adjournments and tax investigations were jumbled together in his mind. The future appeared increasingly hazy, and he felt the same fatalistic confusion he knew on that dip in the coast highway near Sugarcane Road, where night sea fog suddenly swept over the cane fields. What should he anticipate around the next murky bend? A riskily unlit hippie cyclist? An invisible hitchhiker? A petrol tanker thundering across the imperceptible lane markings? Why would he ever see his way clear? So he's using the metaphor of one of the roads that he travels into the local town as having this blind corner. A corner where in certain conditions you can't see what's coming. And he feels like he's destined to stumble upon something where he's either going to destroy them or someone's going to destroy him. Notice it's a coastal road, so it's like if you travel down the Great Ocean Road, probably something like where if you ran off the road, you're either running into a cliff or into the sea. That's the image that I get in my head at least. And this is I think this is meant to be northern New South Wales as well, so a lot of those coastal roads are the same. It's there's lots of imagery that suggests sort of the Byron Bay, sort of Nimbin, that sort of area. And the the hippie cyclists and the people in the town sort of. Has anyone been up there? Yeah, that's sort of and that's where he is setting a lot of these stories, and some of them are explicitly set in that area, the hinterland sort of, of that area, even from sort of Tweed Heads and stuff like that. So a little bit more south. My mum lives up there. She's nuts. I should have said that. Sorry. But this whole idea that he uses the metaphor that Leon Kay, because this is a third-person narrator. Yeah, you picked that up. Third-person narrator, but we're focalised through Leon Kay. So the third-person narrator has an insight into what Leon Kay is thinking. And here we get closer and closer to almost Leon Kay narrating. He wondered when, at some point, he would hit this point in his life where it was like that road. But he never says like, so it's not a simile, it's a metaphor. He pretends one thing is the other. Against his own best interests, he'd come to dread the weekly visit of the one person who might at least clarify matters for him, his solicitor. What does that mean, at least clarify? What can't the solicitor do in Leon's mind? He can't fix it. He can at least clarify. But he doesn't want to see Gareth Witherell. As the legal process dragged on, he increasingly resented spending every Thursday afternoon and Friday on the lawyer's highly expensive devil's advocacy and narrow legalistic interpretation of the prosecution case. What does that sentence mean? Does anyone do legal studies? So what does that sentence mean? What's devil's advocacy?
When you defend someone who's guilty.
Yep. Yeah, so to play devil's advocate is to advocate for the devil. Yeah, it's to go, look, I know this is wrong, but for the sake of argument, let's assume it's right. So if you're defending someone who you know is guilty, you are playing devil's advocate. Yeah. So his perception, Leon Kay's perception, is that Gareth believes he's guilty of this white-collar crime, and that he's just going through the motions. Yeah. He's got a narrow legalistic interpretation of the prosecution's case. Prosecution is the people suing him, or in this case it would be the state, because they're criminal charges. So the police that are suing him, his lawyer is going, I'm just going to look at it in this way, rather than come at it from every angle, which is what a good solicitor or barrister would do, to try and find loopholes and ways of defending the case. So how invested is this lawyer in actually successfully defending him? From Leon Kay's point of view? Not really. So what hope has he got? Virtually none. Yeah. Does he look back at that last little bit that we've looked at? Does he think he's guilty, or does he think he's innocent? Or does he not say? Is there any indication? Use what you know of the story as well.
So it just seems confused by it all this.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know what's going on. It's like he's completely disengaged from it. He's not defending himself. He's not saying, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. And he's not saying, look, I did it, I just want to deal with the consequences. He's just not dealing with it at all.
Can I please borrow the other highlight of my diary?
Yeah, I don't know how long it will last. Okay, there's more than enough of that. Okay, so He also resented him for eating into his swimming time. This wasn't strictly true. He still swam his usual laps, though less calmly, with Rinthorpe hovering enigmatically at the pool edge, whistling tunelessly through his teeth, and forever looking at his watch. With the lawyer present, he felt bound to don his speedos, and resented not swimming naked too. Why is the swimming so important to Leon?
It's the only thing you can control.
Yeah, it's the only thing he can control. It's an escape. It calms him. And all of the elements of it that are calming are taken away. Because instead of looking up at the empty sky and the birds hovering and whatever, he looks up and sees the guy hovering next to the pool. Instead of being naked, which for him is free, he's covered, which is confining and restrictive. Unavoidably these days, after an hour or so in the lawyer's presence, he lapsed into a mild fugue. What's a fugue? Like a slump, like a, I don't know, I'm doing that. That's a fugue, yeah. That's what the Oxford Dictionary says anyway. So, on a bad day, Winthorpe's monotone could make his brain shut down completely. At the start of his troubles, he tried to fight the unusual effect it had on him, the gradual fainting sensation and cloudy vision, leading to a total mental fade-out, a sort of grey noise where the only background sounds had any relevance. The tap-tapping of the pool's filter box, magpies calling on the lawn, brushed turkeys scratching in the shrubbery. Now he went with it. It wasn't unpleasant, it was almost a reverie, which is what brings you out of a fugue. And he wondered whether it felt like this to be hypnotised. There's lots of sort of suggestion in here. It's not technically imagery. But the idea of sort of blocking out his lawyer and focusing on the background noises, the idea of going into a fugue and then coming out of that fugue with a reverie because of the things that are distracting him from the lawyer, the idea of being hypnotised and no longer in control, what are all these sort of supporting in terms of the characterisation of Leon Kaye? What's he like?
That's really interesting. What's that?
Yeah, he's just disconnected. Yeah. When he fell deeper into this particular stupor, a sort of painless, aura-free migraine, everything about Withdrawal, from his endomorphic physical outline to the veranda table he'd heaped with files, the lawyer's attempt to claim his attention with a crisp conference ambience, faded into the rural hum and buzz and became as abstract and misty as dreams. Notice all the positive imagery that distracts him and gives him comfort is all related to nature, and all the stuff that is causing him anxiety and tension is all man-made. It's all the problems, the person, the clothing, those sorts of things. After the past year of examinations and committal proceedings, it wasn't surprising his mind needed a rest. Tired of raking through the ashes of disgrace, his brain had called a halt. Maybe he was having a mental breakdown. How easy it was to forget the minutiae of the case, the dates, the amounts, the stock transfers and telescoping bank loans, all that paper shuffling, and sink back into the vibrations of trees, livestock and wildlife, of cattle lowing, water dragons scuttling under the veranda, and palms rattling in the wind. Pulling this blanket of nature around his shoulders, he felt safely hidden, a snug wombat in its hole. What techniques are being used in that sentence? Pulling this blanket of nature around his shoulders, he felt safely hidden, a snug wombat in its hole. What's the technique? Metaphor, yeah? Just be careful, it's not, why isn't it simile?
It doesn't use like or...
Doesn't use like or as. Yeah. Nature is a blanket here. Nature is a blanket. He is a wombat. Yeah. What's the difference between simile and metaphor? Which image is stronger? Metaphor is stronger because he's become a wombat. Nature has become a blanket. When you use like,
It's just like comparing it.
it's comparing it to. When nature is a blanket, it becomes much denser and much more solid and much more powerful. He is not just like a wombat, he actually is. He takes on all of the characteristics and behaviours. I'd love to be a wombat, that'd be awesome. Yeah. If anyone put their hand in my burrow, I'd crush their hand with the big solid bony plate in my bum. Yeah, wombats have this awesome armour. Have you know? That's why when you hit one in your car, they just turn their bum and they put their bum because they think that's so strong, and then they wreck your car. I've never hit a wombat. I wouldn't be able to live with myself. I love wombats. Anyway, off track. So the metaphors are really strong. What are those metaphors doing? What meaning are they constructing in this instance? What's he doing? If he's a wombat, if he's covering himself with a blanket of nature.
Trying to escape.
Yeah, it's all about escape, isn't it? Are we getting the sense that escape is a good thing? That just pretending that nothing's happening is a good thing? No. Somehow, less ignoble, he could even fantasize about the puzzling uniqueness of his position. Instead of a former company director, yes.
Sorry, what's ignoble mean?
Ignoble, like unimportant, yeah. Instead of a former company director under indictment for alleged corporate misconduct and breaches of directors' duties, why are they put in inverted commas?
Because he believes it's not true.
Could mean that. Yeah.
Because they're not important. Like,
They're trivial, and they're probably the real words of the charge. So all of those things can be going on at once. He doesn't believe them, they're not important to him, and then the actual words could all be constructed through those inverted commas. And I'd say having all three of those in your interpretation of the use of that technique actually gives you a much more robust understanding of what's going on in that line when they're all together than just having one of them. He could be a beleaguered sovereign awaiting news from the front.
What does believe in mean?
Beleaguered means like set upon, troubled, but he's almost like a martyr. Yeah, so he's the hero, sovereign like king. You know, so it's like he's under siege. You feel sorry for him, not someone who's stolen the pension fund of all of his employees, who suddenly they're not the hero. Right? Maybe a Caribbean president anticipating a peasant uprising from the sugarcane fields below. That's not as positive, is it? Yeah? So you see, he goes, oh, maybe I'm okay. No, hang on, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm this nasty dictator who's screwing over the peasants. If only the calm didn't end at the last lap. At the moment his fingertips tipped the wall behind him and he stood, removed his goggles and allowed dusk's pink-grey shadows to settle on his body for a few seconds. But inevitably, reality returned. Inevitably, reality returned. What's the technique when there's a repetition of sound but it's not the first sound in the word? Assonance. Yep. And assonance is when it's a vowel sound. Yeah. What would it be if it was a non-vowel? No, alliteration is always the same sound at the start of the word.
Consonant.
Consonants. Consonants is when it's a non-vowel sound. So, which one's this? Inevitably, reality. No, it's assonance because Y is a vowel sound. Yeah. So inevitably, reality returned. He stepped heavily out of the pool, shivering now and streaming water, and stamped bare-assed across the terrace to the house. Section breaks is a structural feature. What do they do?
Make you think about what you just read.
Yep, gives you a moment of pause to allow you to think and process what you've just read. So let's do that. Jot down in pencil there what's been established thus far. What's been established in this first section of this story? Who is Leon? What do you think of him? What scenario is being developed? What's likely for his future? That's what that section break is for. It's to allow you a moment of pause to do all that thinking. While you do that, what else might the section break do?
Skip through the time.
Yeah, it allows for a delineation of time. So we can jump forward, we could jump back, we can shift time and space, so we can move to another place. So it's like a chapter break in a longer novel. So what do we think about what the text has been about thus far? I mean, you've nearly all read all of it, but what do we think thus far, as a reader reading it for the first time, what's going on?
Maybe it's easy to hide from like a reality, and escaping is not the best way to go.
Yeah, so hiding from a reality, escaping not the best idea, these sorts of things. It's easy to hide. It's not a good idea necessarily, because Leon's not thriving in this illusion that he's building. So can you see that connection to Gatsby, that idea that he's not trying to relive the past, but he's certainly not dealing with the present? Yeah?
I was just thinking before when it said inevitably reality returned, it kind of reminded me of the last quote. Gatsby.
Yep, good. Yeah, so there's a natural order to things. This guy's going to have to face the crimes that he's committed, or perhaps being accused of committing. We never really know whether he's guilty or not. And he can't really avoid that. So it's silly to try and do that. That's sort of what the suggestion is. Okay, let's keep going. We'll try and move a little bit faster. Lushly green, thanks to the prime position between the coast and the Nightcap Ranges. His 32 acres lay along a north-south valley of carved-up dairy farms, formerly dense rainforest known as the Big Scrub. Cleared of its native red cedars a century ago, the rich volcanic soil now nurtured in their place a thriving feral tree, the camphor laurel. Imported from China during the 19th century, preoccupation with arboreal neatness. Long escaped from its municipal parks and government schoolyards, the camphor laurel now ran as wild and free as a thistle and dandelion throughout the northern rivers, and disgracefully as scenically unrestrained intervals over Leon Kay's acres. Where is he living? Talk to me about where he's living. In a valley, it's very lush, it's great farmland, people thrive there, the rich soil. Is he thriving? So if he's in that space and he's not thriving, there's got to be a reason. He's on 32 acres. Who lives on acreage? Is 32 acres a lot? Is it enough to farm?
Depends how big your farm is.
Yeah, it's probably enough for a hobby farm. It's not enough to make a living from. Yeah, unless you're running like a horse agistment or something like that, it might be enough for that. But even then, it's not that big. It's not that big. So this is a guy who's come from the city to be, to do a tree change or something like that. He's not a farmer, but where is he living? In amongst farmland. Connect that to the description of the camphor laurel. Whose family's always lived in Woodend, this Lancefield, Romsey sort of area? How do they feel about the new townies coming up from Melbourne with their fancy cars and moving into hobby farms? Not too good. My auntie was thinking of buying a property in Anglesey, and she went down there and she stayed there a couple of times and went to the local pub and like, oh yeah, we're from Essendon, and like, well, don't think about buying here. This is, families live here. So it's like the whole idea of
That sounds like.
being an outsider. Yeah, being an outsider is unusual.
Oh, well, it's described the tree is described as disgracefully here, and that's sort of what he's.
Yeah, it's an introduced pest,
Yeah.
like a fox or a rabbit. It's it's a foreign species that's coming to a place that doesn't belong, and it's taking over. It's a weed. Camphor laurel's a weed. It's a beautiful tree, but it's a weed.
So just saying that's what he is.
Yeah, and as we know, not only is he from the city and in the country where he doesn't belong and the people in the country don't feel he belongs there, we know later that he's also an immigrant. Yeah? And so there's a lot of sort of stuff here around why is he so willing to just ignore everything? Perhaps he just doesn't feel or has never felt like he belongs there, that he's been accepted there, well before all the troubles started. Of course, his neighbours, real farmers, because he's not real, many of whose ancestors had raised the original forest to plant grass for their cattle, detested the camphor laurel as an alien weed. Look at all the negative words there. A timber version of the Asian hordes. Wow, these farmers are pretty racist. Wouldn't you say? If he might harbour some guilt deep in his heart for his alleged misdemeanours, uncharacteristic errors of judgment through overwork, a misplaced trust in subordinates, unforeseen vagaries in the market. Why is that italicized in brackets?
So that is lawyer's defence case.
This is his lawyer's defence. They're not his words, they're his lawyer's words. So if he might harbour some guilt deep in his heart for his alleged misdemeanours, blah blah blah, he hadn't a leaf, a twig of environmental guilt. He didn't feel guilty about the camphor laurels on his property. How could those farmers understand the quiet pleasure those camphor laurels gave him? Their gentle tears sloping and rolling away towards the cane fields and the sea. He found the trees' leafy density and undulating outlines attractively foreign. At dusk, their voluptuous silhouettes filled him with nostalgia for something ordered yet indefinable, contentment, even romance. A lot of feminine language in his description, which is slightly weird, don't you reckon? He's sort of talking about a tree like it's this sexy woman. But what's he really connecting to? It's a romantic connection to Europe and his European heritage. And it makes him feel very comfortable. And things, again, we get back to that, it's predictable, it's ordered. It's something that he can understand and feels comfortable with. It removes the unknown that comes with Australia for a second generation migrant. There was a cosy childish component too in the tree's rounded European appearance. His daughters used to call them broccoli trees, the camphor laurels reminding them of that unwelcome clumpy vegetable on their dinner plates. For him, they recalled the trees in the picture books of his youth. The magic faraway tree was a favourite, which is Enid Blyton. Even the word camphor brought back aromatic childhood memories, his grandmother's wardrobes and linen chest in Budapest, his own camphor laurels. Meanwhile, were forever striking new shoots, which he made no attempt to cut out. It was another count against him, this city gent's whimsy, a hobby farmer's un-Australian and neglectful misuse of the land. Has anyone's parents at home got a camphor wood chest? They're often quite common for sort of, women in the 1950s and 1960s to get as a hope chest where they keep their dowry or all the things that they would take into their marriage. It's an antiquated notion. My mum had one. But they have a very, very particular smell. Very particular smell. Camphor wood has a very, very strong scent, which is what he's talking about. This scent takes in places which smell does. His property was L-shaped, with a farmhouse and his 16 highest acres forming the vertical part of the L. On the horizontal bottom 16, beyond the red clay dam and the orchard, with its rotting and desiccated fruit, his 23 beef cattle, a token herd to fatten and sell, grazed behind a multicoloured foreign tackle of blackberry, lantana and bougainvillea, the subject of monthly noxious weed action, warnings from the local council. So notice that we've got 3 more weeds identified there. Lately, a couple of headstrong yearlings had begun squeezing through the electric fence and barbed wire into a neighbouring property. Their dopey discontent. They were happy to be zapped and lacerated every day just to sample the identical grass on the other side. Astounded him at first, but no longer. That was the country for you. Is he like the cattle? All answers don't necessarily have to have an automatic yes. What do you think?
No, because the cattle will keep trying.
Yep.
What they're doing may not be sensible, but they keep trying. He's just not doing it.
He's not even trying. So in fact, he's not like the cattle. The cattle, in his mind, are dopey because they keep trying to attain something that they want, even though what they want is valueless, because it's the same as what they've got. But he's even worse than that because he's not even trying to escape the confines of, his life. He had never claimed to be any sort of farmer himself. In the first enthusiastic flush of ownership, he keenly planted a wide sample of regional produce: mangoes, guavas, macadamia and pecan nuts, a few coffee bushes for novelty's sake, some custard apples, imaginative hybrid citrus like lemonade trees and tangelos, also papayas, bananas, lychees and avocados. He'd imagined satisfying strolls through his orchard after Sunday lunch parties, and healthy family breakfasts of his own exotic fruits, icy glasses of guava and citrus juice, mangoes sliced into clever cubes. But once the troubles began, the Sunday parties quickly fell away, and breakfast somehow never progressed beyond toast and coffee. Soon he was eating and living alone, and those few trees still bearing fruit were taken over by fungus and fruit fly, birds and flying foxes. So that whole paragraph is one long symbol. It's an extended symbol. It's not a metaphor because it's real, it's really there, but it's used for symbolic impact. What is the symbolic impact? What does it represent?
The dream and the reality.
The dream versus the reality. The dream is the first half, what he imagined, what he hoped, and then the reality is that very bottom part that they went to rot and he was left with no family, no friends, and rotting fruit. What does the rotting fruit represent?
Like corruption.
Yep. So the fruit on the tree was fresh and health. It was vitality and vigour.
That's not like from a rot.
And then the rot is the opposite of that. It's the removal of all the nutrient and life-giving properties. It's the corruption of that dream. It's the corruption of him and his future and that hope.
And is the flying foxes and that are eating the fruit, is that like?
The things that are preying on him, yeah.
Okay.
Since the sale of the yacht and the ski lodge, the farm was his only nominal asset. Diddums. Poor man with 32 acres in the far north New South Wales. The house, a century-old hardwood Queenslander, possibly over the border, badly needed renovating. But under such close financial scrutiny, he couldn't carry out necessary repairs. So if you're indicted for corporate fraud and you're being prosecuted for that, all your assets are frozen. So you could be a billionaire. you can't spend any of it. You're released an allowance from your own bank account. Yeah, all your assets are frozen until the outcome of the court case. So that's what's happened to him. The authorities were monitoring his accounts. He imagined teams of investigative accountants trawling over his petrol and grocery bills, frowning at the checks for swimming pool chlorine and pony feed. But frankly, it wasn't just the financial block preventing him from acting on anything. What's preventing him if not the financial burden? What's stopping him from fixing the house?
It was a deep lack of will.
Yeah, that's what it says. Yeah. But why is that? Why is there such a deep lack of will?
He's given up.
Yeah. You ever got a bad mark in a subject you thought you were all right in? Were you motivated to go away and work hard the next day? You might have overcome that, but the immediate sense is, oh God, why am I even bothering to try here? And so, that's life for him now. It's like was incredibly successful, the director of a big company with a ski lodge and a yacht and farm property as well as his house in the city. And now he's got nothing. It's like, well, why should I even bother trying to fix this house? Can't fix anything else. So there's this real sort of depth of sort of a sense of lack of strength and lack of impact on his own life. Where I'm up to. Even a phone call to the local tradesman was a daunting prospect, requiring more mental effort than he could muster. Meanwhile, unless a southerly was blowing, the septic tank reeked intrusively. The house timbers were peeling and cracking, and the electrical wiring was questionable. Increasingly, light bulbs popped after a few days. The tennis court lights were failing too. The last bulb was flickering and ready to blow. But to change them would also be expensive. He'd have to call an electrician and hire a cherry picker. It hardly seemed worth the effort now that he had no tennis companions night or day. So it's a reminder that he's absolutely alone. But the symbolism of all the lights going out is also important. What is the symbolism of the lights going out? Hope. Yeah? Absence of hope. More importantly, for his daily well-being, the pool, built 90 years after the house, the first vital change he'd made when he bought the property 10 years before, already required extensive doctoring. Electrical fade-outs affected its pump, the tiles were loosening, and blue-green algae always threatened. He swore he could see algal spores borne on the breeze and grey fungal scales clinging to the trunks of the poolside palms, awaiting their chance to poison his water.
I was going to say, is that kind of the connection to the other farmers not wanting this foreign weed because the pool was put in place when he moved in there?
Yeah.
So all this algae that's trying to attack is like all these other farmers.
Well, and also the pool is his one safe place. And so he's seeing that one safe place is absolutely in peril. And he can only do so much to fight it. It's an ever-losing battle to retain that safety. This was one problem he knew he must act on. That sentence is really important, isn't it? This was one problem he knew he must act on. So he knows that he's not acting on the myriad of other problems that also just require his attention. If the structure of his life was crumbling, the pool was the only thing keeping him sane. Another important sentence. What's the significance of those two very important sentences coming just before the section break?
Foreshadowing maybe he's going to lose that.
Yep. That the pool is at risk. That the rest of his life will go if the pool goes. And of course we know that that's the case. He loses the pool to a snake and therefore loses his life. Spoiler. But you've all read it. Well, not everyone, but bad luck. Okay. How are we going? Yeah, we'll keep going. We won't get to another section break. We'd be lucky, we'd have to go through double the amount. Okay. His old city friends shunned him as if he were contagious, and except to complain in terse phone calls about his tree-passing cattle and noxious weeds, his farmer neighbours didn't communicate with him, although most days their vehicles passed him at high speed. This sense of isolation is also incredibly important because it's in itself a problem. It's a symptom of the larger problems of his life. The fact that he's isolating himself because his contact with the outside world reminds him of all the problems that he has and he's trying to ignore them. But in a sense, the isolation is a problem also, because being isolated, he just falls further and further and further into this dark place that he's creating. The shared lane to his farm was a winding tunnel of blind turns, ferny overgrowth and fairy roadkill through and over, which every other driver drove murderlessly fast. Whenever he went to town, purposefully observing the speed limit, his car was tailgated by furious motorists, and sometimes also by mysterious white vehicles. Several times he'd notice a white car parked in his lane, while someone photographed the house and property from the front gate. When he stepped outside to question the photographer, the man, he couldn't tell if it was the same man, nonchalantly sauntered to his car and accelerated away. Some authority keeping tabs on him, he supposed. One of the many gung-ho state and federal acronyms fighting corporate crime nowadays, all competing to capture the big business scalps. Notice that his voice is very defensive of like this focalized narrator through Leon. Very defensive of corporate criminals. Do you reckon the reader is overly sympathetic to people like him, like directors of companies that have ripped off people? Unlikely. Because most people aren't massive company directors, and in Australia we have a tall poppy syndrome where anyone that's been very successful, we're quite willing to cut down at the first sign of trouble. You heard tall poppy syndrome? So it's just that, hey, don't think you're better than anyone else, or we'll tell you that you're not, sort of idea. It's very Australian, yeah. And so the reader's unlikely to feel a great deal of sympathy for him. Where am I up to? Perhaps the prosecution or the tax office working in cahoots. Maybe a private investigator acting for a major creditor. He'd felt paranoid the first time he spotted this overt surveillance, and for several nights was unable to sleep. More fatalistic these days, he expected nothing less, and still slept badly. What does that paranoia tell us? Has he got something to hide? He doesn't seem to be doing anything that's wrong, does he? On his property. He doesn't seem to be like continuing to defraud people or whatever. But he perhaps feels guilty. And if he feels guilty, probably, I don't know what you think, but probably is guilty. But it's just interesting that the way that he perceives that, I think. As for the road rages, it had jolted him for a moment to think they might be financially wounded shareholders, retirees who lost their life savings, a small mum and dad investor, like his own Anya and Appa, which are, I think, the parent names in the family that he belonged to. Lifelong hard workers and money savers, little people, some media hacks had suggested. That thought didn't bear considering for too long. No, he assured himself, they wouldn't be chasing him. He had a silent telephone number. He wasn't on the local electoral roll, probably just impatient tradesmen, testy plumbers or electricians in a hurry to the next job or to the pub. Whoever they were, most of these journeys ended with their angry horn blasts and aggressive two-finger salutes. Nevertheless, this was a hard-to-break habit from his swimming training of 30 years ago, and urged to become a regular Australian, a suntan sporting champion. He hadn't given up trying to adapt to his surroundings. So this is a bit of a flashback. So that sentence, I think, is a reference to his past self, not his current self. He hadn't given up at that time, trying to adapt to his surroundings, I think is sort of the subtext there. Early on, he'd grown a beard and shelved his conservative city casual wear for polo shirts and deck shoes, for work boots, jeans and heavy hemp shirts brought from a hinterland shop called Don't Tell Mama. The labels warned, do not consume. However, the change of image, the green and khaki hemp, the boots, the greying whiskers, hadn't prevented a rattled old hippie from accosting him in public. This was in the main street during his Saturday morning shopping. Out of a weedy nook between shop fronts leapt a shoeless scarecrow, ragged and bony as Treasure Island's Ben Gunn. As if some dervish releasing button had been activated, he began whirling about on the pavement, dusty dreadlocks spinning, flailing veiny arms and kicking the air. At first, Leon Kay thought he was having a fit. But when the assailant swung a wild punch at him, shouting, "Fucky yuppie wog," I didn't say that right, but I'm not going to repeat it. "Go back home, wanker," he had to duck. He reeled back in surprise. "Take it easy, mate." So what does that tell us? What does this interaction tell us? Does this guy know him? Because he doesn't know this guy, so the chances are that the guy doesn't know him. But there's something immediately apparent about Leon Kay that other people know that he doesn't belong there.
What does yuppie mean?
Yuppie's like, it was a real 1990s term of like, you know, guys on their mobile phone with their white suit, you know, Miami Vice style. It's sort of like, you know, wealthy, think you're eating a bit, you know, up yourself sort of attitude.
Oh, right.
Yeah? Think hipster, but 1990s. Yeah? So the connotation, the negative connotation that comes with hipster. Yeah? I'm not against hipsters. I don't like soup though, so they tend to like soup. I'm saying some weird stuff today, I know that. They do like soup and they like skinny black jeans, and I can't wear skinny black jeans. So I'm definitely not a hipster. I'm very jealous. I'd love to wear skinny black jeans. But I'm fat, so I can't. People peered out from doorways and cafes. "Come on, I'll do ya!" The aggressor launched another childish haymaker that swiped his shoulder. Who was this lunatic? Leon Kay was twice his size, with enough pent-up tension of his own to knock him back into his cave or swamp. What he did was told him off, his pulse pounding in his ears, while he wondered what to do next. Punch into the ground? Self-defence. Plenty of witnesses. In another second, he imagined what a delicious time the Sydney scandal sheets would have of that. At least half of the witnesses would have camera phones. Leon Kay brushed him aside again, as the man's nonsensical obscenities mugged the gentle weekend air. "Shithead poofda, what, city dickhead?" "Steady, Tiger, I'm a local," he protested, mildly enough in the circumstances, inviting the onlookers' sympathy. He forced out an indulgent laugh. Do you reckon he'll get the sympathy of the onlookers? No. Because they're like this crazy guy. They know he doesn't belong there. They probably, you know, these guys are a bit unhinged, but they probably have the same sentiment. They just have the sort of social graces not to act on it. Suddenly he craved sympathy, just as he ached to broadcast the fact that this nutcase, the whole community, everyone, had got him wrong. "My mother sewed piecework in Surrey Hills," he wanted to yell. This means that she worked in a factory. And his father, gallant and exhausted, Apam, a civil engineer in Hungary, a respected Kolzner-Nuguk, had worked 2 jobs around the clock in Australia, tyre retreader in Granville, night watchman in Parramatta, driving his son to his daily 5 a.m. swimming training between shifts. He never had time to swim himself, never even had time to learn, he could tell them. This is what he wanted to share with the onlookers, his family's noble struggle, and how he was absolutely his parents' son. But disapproval flooded the street, and it wasn't aimed at the punchy scarecrow. Now, Sonny, a middle-aged woman murmured, don't get yourself head up, Darl. So, this reeking Sonny was that protected species, a local character. Fizzing with adrenaline, Leon K dodged the windmilling fists and pushed past him. Sonny was still dancing on his cracked and crusty feet like a manic flyway. His clothes and bouncing dreadlocks gave off aggressive, pungent odours of smoke and sweat. Big city wanker, I'll be dealing with you. Rather than the altercation itself, it was the unfairness of the presumption behind it that shocked him. That Saturday morning, how could this feral junkie, whose stink now impregnated his own clothes, think he represented the city and all it stood for? He was an interloper there as well. The city, that wished not merely to punish him, but to knock him out of existence. For better or worse, he'd chosen the country. Moreover, he tried to experience its essence. The annual district rodeo, the showgrounds had seemed a place to start. But if he'd expected to see Outback Australia on show, he'd mistaken the event. It was more American Western, Hollywood Western, country and Western. Everyone, men and women and tiny children in Wrangler jeans and pearl-button shirts, in boots and cowboy hats, those country singer Stetsons that looked 3 sizes too big, all of them dressed to the nines in order to see cows and horses discomforting people in a flamboyantly painful way. What's the idea of this rodeo not being the real Australia? What's that about? Why is he so critical of it? Aren't they being critical of him for not being really Australian? And then they're equally quite hypocritical about that. What is it? He's trying to work out, what do you have to do to fit in? Do I have to fake being country? Not just live in the country, adopt some, airs and graces that aren't really what it means to live in a country to actually fit in. Trying to work that out. While the animals took their revenge, he'd shared a bench with some rum and coke drinking rodeo wives and their squabbling children. The crowd oohed as a steer threw a rider heavily against the barrier and then trampled him. Attempting to distract the steer from the prone cowboy, the rodeo clown also caught a horn in the bum, which lifted him 2 metres in the air. Watching him thud to earth like a polka-dotted sack of potatoes, the smallest rodeo offspring, a boy of about 5, announced grimly, "I'm never going to ride those cows." Embarrassed in this company, his mother shrieked, "Don't be a girl, Chad. I'm going to put a dress on you." Her friend sniggered. Chad's mother went on, "I'm going to put a bra and panties on you." Raucous laughter from the other rodeo mothers. She was on a roll. "You'll be sitting down to wee next." This was obviously another side to the country. He seemed doomed to be confused here. Best to keep his head down. He stayed away from the potential hotspots like bars and clubs to prevent any more Sunny-type blow-ups. For serenity's sake, he even gave up the city newspapers and only read the local rag. Better its bluff mixture of Shire jottings, vandalism roundups, New Age guff, and beef queen updates than feline financial gossip and always seeing his name maligned. What's the idea of this kid being harassed by his mother at the rodeo got to do with what Leon's going through? Is the country this idyllic place that he's got in his head it's meant to be? I mean, that image of the mother berating the child is quite an aggressive image, I think. Do you feel like that? I mean, it's misogynistic, number one, because it's the mother's berating the child by calling the boy a girl. Yeah, and we react hopefully, you should, react very strongly towards that. But also, it's a mother having a go at a kid for not wanting to ride a rodeo bull. I mean, that doesn't make sense, does it? And a progressive reader, a progressive society deplores that sort of behaviour. So, I mean, rodeos in general. But child being berated by the parent doesn't work. So there's a lot to not like there. And Leon's looking at this and going, this is really what the country is. I don't fit in here. But he still wants to. What does that tell us about Leon?
Ignorant?
Sorry?
Ignorant?
Yeah,
Or
confused,
naive, I guess?
naive, yeah.
Because he has this idealistic view of something and then kind of refuses to believe it once the truth is presented to him anyway.
Yeah, good. Michaela?
You say desperate?
Yeah, desperate to fit in. Yeah, I reckon that's probably the more prominent one. Well, that's a good point too. I hadn't thought of that, but I think desperate is certainly there. I might stop there, but what I don't see you again until Friday. What I might ask you to do is just do a little bit more of this annotation of your own. So we're up to the top of page 18. I might get you to go I might get you to go to the section break.
Do you mind if I borrow your highlights?
No, just take them on. I might get you to go to the section break on page 27. Okay, and we might then just have some time to deal with just the end of the text. That's the last 10 pages. So we've dealt with about 18 pages today. If we can deal with the last 10 pages together, that'd be great. So then we've got time for questions and stuff as well. But yeah, you can go down to on page 27, there's a section break. It ends with the phrase, he consulted the phone book and discovered an organisation called the Wildlife Survivors. The China Mason stuff, the stuff with the woman coming along, that's actually quite confusing. So I'd prefer to get to that and deal with that than deal with the stuff that's to continue has really already been established. So just continuing to work through it, picking up those 4 aspects. How many people found things to highlight around the views and values colour today? Yeah, some things. What you often find is that you go through the first 3 colours, and then as you go back through, or as you do the questions, that's when you find the big overarching things and where they're captured in the text. So if you found that you've been a bit light on that aspect today, that's okay. All right.